Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of the program today. My name is Celia Merzbacher. I am Executive Director of the Quantum Economic Development Consortium. Our name does not have the word computing in it, so we cover all applications of quantum technologies. And I think that this meeting is really about quantum computing. So I'll focus a little bit on the quantum computing work that we're doing at QED-C today. I'm going to spend time describing the organization and what its goals and objectives are and how it's organized and moving forward to achieve those goals. Okada-san spoke about the international collaborations that are already underway, and I'll talk a little bit about how QED-C is becoming more international. But those activities are very important, and they're important both to the U.S. government and to U.S. industry. I will just remind everyone that I am with an organization that is not part of the government. We get some government funding. I call it startup funds from the U.S. government. But over time, we are increasingly supported by the members of the consortium who come from all other parts of the ecosystem. So this chart some of you may have already seen. It shows the mission of the consortium, which is simple: enable and grow the quantum industry. And the quantum industry includes the supply chain and all of the components that are necessary around an innovation ecosystem, including universities, national laboratories, research institutes, educators of the future workers, as well as the business that's going to be part of the industry. I was very interested to hear about QStar's focus on use cases, and QED-C also thinks at the top about use cases of quantum. And I would say there are three questions. One is, what are the use cases? What are the killer apps? This is a question that we all get a lot. Number two is, how big are the markets going to be? Investors, of course, want to know that, and the people who are making decisions at the top of the companies. And number three is, when will they be here? And answering all three of these questions is something that we're spending some time doing together with all of the members of the consortium. So when you can think of a use case, then you can start to imagine what technology components are going to be necessary. What are the enabling technologies? We sometimes say at QED-C, we're not about the qubits. We're about all the technologies around the qubits. So it's clear that we will need to have advances in cryogenic technologies, in certain types of lasers, in control electronics and readout electronics, and many other non-quantum technologies that are going to be essential for building the quantum systems. So there are these technology gaps that we're trying to identify, and once they're identified, then maybe QED-C will help to fill some of them, maybe a government agency that funds R&D, maybe companies themselves, because it's really close to their product development. And there are other gaps that need to be understood and addressed, such as standards. I think we heard that also earlier. Technical standards are really part of innovation and allowing for many companies to work together to advance a business, an industry. But before you have technical standards, you really need just to have agreed upon specifications for the components, benchmarks of measuring progress towards meeting the requirements and specifications, as well as eventually standards. So we are looking at all of those areas of standardization related to standards. Of course, workforce is a problem across the world, and I would say one of the most common pain points that I hear from my members is the lack of qualified workers. And it takes time, of course, to educate and graduate people with new skills, but there are opportunities, and I want QEDC in some ways to think about creative ways to perhaps upskill the current workforce and to communicate to recent graduates that they don't need to go back and get a new degree. They need to get some quantum knowledge added to their existing degree, and then they will be well qualified to contribute to the field. And finally, there are gaps in policies. We work closely with government agencies to inform their policy decisions, whether that is a decision on where to invest their R&D dollars, what area of quantum does industry think is in need of further research investment, what should the government do in order to bridge this Darwinian sea or valley of death, what policies can government create. When there's insufficient market, then industry is not ready to make the investments. And so there's a period when government can step in and help. Maybe government is an early customer or somehow provide some assurance at the early point in time to get to where the market is big enough to sustain the industry's own investment and other private investment. We have, and that leads to number 3 here, informing public and private investors. So, as I said, we communicate to the government agencies that are making these kinds of investments, generally at earlier stages. But of course, also the private sector makes perhaps even bigger investments. And whether it's private equity or venture capital investors or internal decision makers within companies who need to have the best information, we're trying to make that available. And finally, we're an industry association, and so like all industry associations, we really connect people. And I'll talk a little bit in my next slide about the membership. It's very diverse. And when I ask the QEDC members, what value do you get from belonging to this organization, the first thing they say is meeting other people in this community, finding new customers, finding new collaborators, finding new partners, meeting government program managers who have a problem and I can help. So it's really about connecting all of the different parts of the ecosystem. The way that we're organized is that QEDC is managed by SRI International. SRI is the company I work for. I haven't said much about it. I have a colleague here, Youssef, who can put his hand up. He's SRI Tokyo, and SRI has been around for 75 years. It's a not-for-profit research institute that does primarily contract research for government and for industry. And so it got a contract to help create QEDC in 2018. And that's a little bit different kind of project for SRI. And I'm helping to run that. So QEDC is a project under SRI. It's being managed, administered, and so on by SRI. We have now a number of companies that have joined, and we elect from the membership a steering committee, which is sort of like my board. They don't have, because QEDC is not a legal entity, it's not officially a board, but it's responsible for setting the direction for the consortium and for setting policy. And then, and this is really where the work happens, we have several technical advisory committees, or TACs. And you can see them listed here on the right. So those are committees that meet regularly and where the members come together, and within the scope of each of these committees, they identify common problems and ways to address them and come up with projects and then do the project. So it's very much driven by the members who sign up and have an interest and a passion often for identifying a particular area that needs to be addressed. We don't really share any proprietary information. We don't generate intellectual property that is technically based. We generate reports and useful data, and we share that with the members. And that's one of the benefits, of course, of joining QEDC. So at the top we have, and these committees sort of match those objectives on the first slide. We have a committee that's focused on use cases, and it's divided into sensing, communications, and networking, and security, and computing. And they, again, are each sort of addressing that problem, that challenge in their own way. We look forward to, later this year, actually having some collective information about use cases that we publish and share with the other members. I will say that the sensors use case group has done an amazing job of pulling together information about different kinds of sensors and different applications, from biomedical to mineral exploration to navigation systems. And that's just an example of the kind of sort of shared collective intelligence that the use case group develops. The Enabling Technologies group, I think, is in some ways the heart of the organization, because they do deep dives on the technologies that are going to be essential to advancing quantum systems. So we've had workshops on a number of technology areas that developed, if not a roadmap, at least a detailed needs document. And these are not reports that we publish out to the world. These are really a value of being part of the consortium, so you get access to that kind of detailed information if you join QEDC. The standards group is actually one of the most active groups, and I'll show the results of some of their work here in a minute. The workforce group, I think everybody understands, is focusing on various activities that can grow and connect the students to the opportunities. If you think about when you were in university, often you don't have much exposure and contact with the industry, and that's normal. But we can help let students see what this industry is about. It's very exciting to students. There's high interest. And so connecting students with internship opportunities and eventually with jobs is one of the activities that we have. And you can actually go to the QEDC website, and at the top it says Quantum Jobs. And there we have a list of the jobs at all the QEDC member companies. So that's, again, a benefit of being a member. You get to advertise the openings at your company on our website. We have two cross-cutting TACs. One is new, and it's focused on quantum and law. And they are identifying areas where there's a legal aspect that's important to the companies. And I would say the top three topics they are looking at first are export and import issues, and they are looking to develop some white papers that they can share with government policymakers who are thinking about these issues. A second topic for the quantum law TAC is intellectual property. Are there any issues or aspects of intellectual property protection that are specific or unique to quantum? Not clear. But for instance, we are able to reach out to the US patent office and offer to do some trainings with their examiners so that they have better understanding of this emerging technology. There's always a need for that kind of education, professional education in the patent offices, and we're able to help with that. And the third topic that they are looking at is in the area of immigration. And in fact, the US government has chosen at this time to review their immigration policies and to, in some ways, interpret them very broadly so that they can make it easier for people who want to come to the US to do research and work in some of these areas. So quantum, it turns out, is in some ways a pilot project or a poster child for some of these new government policies. And then we have a TAC that's on quantum for national security. That one happens to be only available to US companies, but there might be something similar at QSTAR that would focus on the Japanese national security interests in this field. So here's the information about the members today. As it shows on the left, we do have broad representation. We are called a consortium of stakeholders, and we have many different kinds of stakeholders. We certainly have businesses, corporations of all sizes, and universities, national laboratories, which in the US are in some cases not managed by government agencies, but contracted out to companies to manage. So you may be familiar with some of them: Argonne National Laboratory, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, Oak Ridge National Laboratory. These are all members of QEDC. And also we have some other types of members, nonprofit associations or professional societies who have a similar interest in advancing the field. And all parts of the stack, I guess: hardware and software system developers, suppliers of various components, service providers. We have a patent law firm that's a member, for example, and of course researchers and educators as well. But there's a strong industry focus. We're driven by the industry needs, but we recognize all of these stakeholders will be important. And as the chart on the right shows, we have about 70% of the members are corporate members. And I will say that of the corporate members, probably 75% are small companies. That is about 300 employees or fewer. And probably half of those are very small companies. So our membership is predominantly small organizations. And I will point out that even at a big company like Amazon or Google, the quantum part of the company is a small company inside there. So they act a little bit more like a small company in some ways. And they have very similar problems to the small companies too. So you can see the sort of broad distribution and inclusive aspect here of QEDC. I will say also that, and I'll show a map in a minute, as we go international, the corporate membership is increasingly international. And today we have about 25 companies that are headquartered outside the US that are members of QEDC. So this is the map that shows the countries from which we admit members. And you can see it's all of Europe. We have Japan and South Korea and Australia and New Zealand, and then US and Canada. So we're really building a trusted community. That's our goal. These countries and regions are like-minded, and the US government is signing bilateral agreements with many countries, and Japan was the first in 2019. QEDC is sort of coming behind that. The government says we want to work together. Industry naturally works together, and so it's making it easy for us to be able to grow the industry and do these kind of cross-country collaborations. So I guess I'm out of time, so I won't go through these impact examples in any detail. I'll just mention them, and if you're interested in knowing more, you can see me afterwards. QEDC has done for the last 2 years an assessment of the quantum computing market with a forecast looking ahead about 5 years, and we plan to continue to do that. We do that in partnership with Q2B, actually, and it gets presented every year at the December meeting. This has been published, so it's also available on our website. I mentioned that we do benchmarking, and this is also something that was published once it was done. The members did it, but they shared it with the world. And there's a paper you can find on the archive showing the benchmarks that were developed and available to run on different platforms. And there's a GitHub site where you can go and use these benchmarks yourself, all publicly available. This is the result of a workforce study, and this paper also was published in IEEE Transactions on Education, so you can easily find it and read it. And it showed that most jobs don't require a PhD. Most jobs are not in physics even, and there are many opportunities that go from business to technical support to engineering to science across the companies. And the last thing, if I can take 30 seconds, and this is really something that hasn't been announced very much by QEDC, although there was an announcement about being selected. We received funding from the government to do a quantum technology manufacturing roadmap, and that's just getting started. So I have experience in the semiconductor industry, and I know a lot about the semiconductor roadmap and how impactful that was for the semiconductor industry. Last year, when the opportunity came to apply for this funding, I asked all of the QEDC members, do you think it's time for a roadmap for our industry? And the response was unanimous, yes. So we submitted our proposal and we got some funding to do a roadmap. It's going to be the first edition. I'm sure it will be updated and it will grow and evolve. It doesn't mean that we're going to be bringing in the roadmaps of the individual companies. It means we're going to find the common barriers and bottlenecks and technology gaps that need to be addressed. And it will help inform the supply chain. These small companies especially need some certainty about where things are going, and this roadmap can help. And then we'll identify gaps, and then that will allow the industry to go forward and fill the gaps faster. I would agree with the statement that was made. We're about not where we're going, but how fast we can go forward. And I sometimes say we're paving the road right in front of us. We're trying to do what needs to be done now to move forward faster. So I hope you'll follow QEDC. We have a LinkedIn site, we have a Twitter, we have a lot of information. We have a YouTube channel with our quantum marketplace. You should check that out. And we also have a bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, we put out a newsletter. You don't have to be a member to sign up and get the newsletter. So if you go to our website, you can click on the button there to get the newsletter. But I hope some of you will think about joining QEDC. We welcome companies that are based outside the US and from Japan. So thank you very much.